Welcome to the Odyssey Podcast. This is Jean Cavellos, Director of Odyssey. Odyssey is an intensive 6-week workshop for writers of fantasy, science fiction, and horror whose work is approaching publication quality. Odyssey is held each summer on the campus of St. Anselm College in Manchester, New Hampshire. Adult writers from all over the world apply. Only 16 are admitted. Top authors, editors, and agents serve as guest lecturers. For more information, visit www.odysseyworkshop.org. Podcast number 3 is an excerpt from a lecture Gardner Dozois gave at Odyssey in the summer of 2004 on getting published. The text of this recording is copyright 2004 by Gardner Dozois. The sound recording is copyright 2007 by Odyssey Writing Workshops.
Well, every editor is different about this. Some editors don't like cover letters. I like cover letters myself because they give you some information that you need, and that they can give you a feeling of the personality of the writer, which can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on the writer. If you can write a short, but clever, witty, and intelligent-sounding cover letter, then you're sort of giving the editor an early clue that you're smart, witty, and intelligent, and maybe it's worthwhile paying a little more attention to your story. But I should warn you that many, many, many more people think that they can write a smart, witty, and intelligent cover letter than actually can do so. And if you try to do this and fail, then basically what you're sending is an indication that you're a Looney Tune of some sort, which is not what you want to do. You're probably safer keeping it fairly straight. What it should convey is if you have any professional credentials at all, they should be in there. If you sold stories, the markets you sold them to should be in there. If you have professional credentials that are not necessarily in the same area as a science fiction or fantasy story, but are still professional credentials, like you write a column for the Washington Post, or you have a nonfiction book about Civil War soldiers or something that's out there, that also should be in your cover letter, because it's another indication that maybe you're worth paying a little bit more attention to than the average people in the slush pile. If you have any particularly interesting educational qualifications, especially if they've got anything to do with the area of expertise in the story, then that should be in the cover letter. If you've spent 5 years in the wild studying the Siberian tigers, and your story is about people studying Siberian tigers, and you probably should mention that in the cover letter because it gives more credibility to the expertise you bring to the story. Now, no editor has all the expertise about everything, but I'm more likely to trust your expertise if it sounds like you actually know what you're talking about. So anything like that should go in the cover letter. There's no such thing as a story that's been bought because of the cover letter, and there's no such thing as a story that's been rejected solely on the grounds of the cover letter. So it's not vital, but it does sort of introduce you a bit as a person, and maybe if you can figure out a good way to do it without making a fool of yourself, a bit of your personality. And that helps to differentiate you a bit from the other writers in the slush pile. Anything you can do to differentiate yourself in a positive way, I emphasize in a positive way, from the other authors in the slush pile is all to the good, because like I said, there's 1,000 of them in there every month. And if you can call a little bit of attention to yourself in a positive way, then that's all to the good. You're not going to buy yourself a lot of attention with this. Maybe a minute or two more attention or a little bit closer attention than your story would get ordinarily. But every minute or two can count, because in that minute or two you can set the hook into the editor and make him want to read your story. So it helps. When I started out myself as a writer, I put anything I could think of in there, no matter how tenuous it was. And then later, when I actually had real credentials, and I would put the real credentials in instead of these grasping at straws credentials that I'd had to put in the early stories. So every story that you sell is a building stone, stepping stone. Then that goes in the cover letter for your next story. Now, what pile your story ends up in depends on the magazine you're sending to. At Asimov's, I used to read everything myself, including the slush and all the professional submissions. So it didn't really make a lot of difference at Asimov's, although I would go through the mail and sort them into professional, slush, and what I called the semi-pro pile. And that, as I was reading all the stories anyway, that didn't really mean a lot, except that it meant that the stuff in the semi-pro pile was maybe looked at with a little bit more attention, maybe for a minute or two longer than the stuff in the slush pile was. The professional submissions, of course, were a different story altogether. But there are places, I believe FNSF is like this, where they take out the professional submissions and pass them on to the editor, and the slush and the semi-pro stuff is dealt with by a different editor. So anything you can do that can get yourself out of the slush. It may even be that they I think they send the pro stuff and the semi-pro stuff up to a different editor. So anything you can do to get yourself out of the slush pile is probably something you want to do. Because you just read the slush with less attention because you have to. You can't deal with 1,000 manuscripts a month if you read every word on every line and every page. It's just impossible. Nobody could do it. And a good slush pile reader, in fact, will read through 200-300 stories at a setting, and you're not reading all of the stories. You're reading just enough, maybe a sentence or two here and there, to get the impression that this either isn't good or that it's not appropriate for the market that you're buying for. It doesn't necessarily have to be bad, but it's just not the kind of thing that the market you're reading for it wants to buy. So it's possible, I'm sure it happens all the time, that something actually good may be in the slush pile and might slip through simply because the slush reader has to read the manuscript so fast. But if you're in the semi-pro pile and you're getting a little bit more attention and they're taking a little bit more time, then maybe you've got a better chance that the editor will actually recognize the worth of your story rather than missing it. So anything you can do to get yourself over there is to the best. Another way to get yourself over there is socialize with the editors and people in the field. Go to conventions. Get to know the editors without making a psychotic stalker pain in the ass out of yourself. If you get to be on friendly terms with them, then an entirely valid thing to say in your slush pile is, I met you at Disclave, and we had the cup of coffee and we talked about the monkeys. And they say, oh, that was, I remember that person. She seemed like a nice guy. And then you might get into the semi-profile just on the strength of that. Although, again, it's very rare that a manuscript is ever bought on the strength of that. But it may get a little more attention on the strength of that. So it pays, if you're going to be a working professional in the field, to get to know the people that are out there. And this is true of the novel editors as well as the short fiction market editors. Yes?
Would having publications and webzines count?
It doesn't really count a lot because there's so many of them, and many of them nobody's ever heard of, and maybe like 2 people and a dog read them. So If they're well-known websites, if they're websites that have gathered some sort of attention as being a reliable market, then yeah, it would count. I mean, obviously, if you sold something to sci fiction or even one of the somewhat lesser but still known websites like Strange Horizons or something, yeah, definitely that counts as a semi-pro market that you should put in your cover letter. Yes.
Question about etiquette. I had a piece get through the first readers of a magazine, and then which goes up to the higher level. They've had it for 7 months. How should...
7 months is beginning to seem a bit extreme. After 7 months, I think you are justified in sending a polite, and I emphasize polite, letter of inquiry. The problem with letters of inquiry is a double-edged sword because sometimes editors get pissed off, even though they shouldn't be pissed off after keeping a story 7 months, and will just say, well, here's your stupid story, and reject it back to you. So, it can go either way. On the other hand, 7 months is an awfully long time. So it might not hurt to send her a polite query.
What about, like, big don'ts or pet peeves or things that you've just seen so many times in cover letters that are a huge turn-off?
Well, one thing that I don't like in cover letters is giving a very detailed synopsis, particularly in short fiction, giving a detailed synopsis of what the story is about. Mainly I don't like it because almost anything sounds stupid in synopsis. I mean, you say, well, there's this guy and a whale bites off his leg and then he spends the rest of his life chasing around trying to kill the whale. Now that really sounds like something you want to read. So almost anything can be made stupid sounding in synopsis. So I would not put in the synopsis. I would not put in what the moral of the story is, just in case the editor doesn't get it. I mean, if you can't get it out of reading the story, then I don't need to know that it's, your message about how wrong it was for President Bush to invade Iraq. I mean, either that's going to be clear from the story or it isn't. Make sure you get the name of the editor correct and you spell it correctly. I get this a lot, where they use my first name, my last name as my first name, or they use my first name as my last name, or they misspell my name. And this always sort of inclines you poorly towards the manuscript. If they can't take the time to look up your name, then how much attention can they be paying? Also make sure that you're sending it to the right magazine. That sort of is an indication you're not paying a lot of attention to. I've had stories arrive on my desk addressed to the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, Amazing, any other market you can think of. And I've also been called Dear Gordon Van Gelder. I've been called Dear Ellen Datlow. Dear Shauna McCarthy, from somebody who had not read the magazine for 20 years or was working with a very old writer's digest. All of these things, and any mix you can imagine, Dear Gordon Van Gardner, it's just an indication that you're not being professional. You should at least take enough time to find out what the correct name of the editor and the correct name of the magazine is that you're submitting to. If you don't, you're just not paying attention. As far as stories are concerned, I'm frequently asked what I'm tired of seeing or what I don't want to see anymore or what kinds of stories are too cliched. And I'm always reluctant to be specific about this because every time somebody says something in a public forum, like a magazine or a convention panel, I don't want any vampire stories. And that's just the exact moment when some writer of genius writes the best vampire story of the last 30 years, and they don't send it to you because you've said you don't want to see vampire stories anymore. So I like to keep my options open, and what I tell writers, which infuriate them, is that I want to see good stories, and they say, no, we want the specific kind of story that you're looking for, and the specific kind of story that you're not looking for, and it doesn't work like that. As far as what kinds of stories you ought to be writing, I have my own feeling is that by the time you can recognize a bandwagon enough to jump on it, that probably the bandwagon and the parade have passed already. I want to see something that I didn't know I wanted until I read the story. I don't want to see your versions of other people's stories. I mean, I don't want you to write a Bill Gibson story or a Stephen King story or whoever is hot at the moment. I want you to write your own stories, and if you write them well enough, then I'll say, geez, all the time I've wanted a Your Name Goes Here story, and I didn't know it until I picked this up. So that's what you've got to do.
The text of this recording is copyright 2004 by Gardner Dozois. The sound recording is copyright 2007 by Odyssey Writing Workshops.